The announcement came in September 1970. Apollo 17 had not yet flown. Apollo 14 was 6 months in the future. And NASA announced that the Apollo program was over. Not after the last mission, before 3 of them. On September 2, 1970, NASA officially canceled Apollo missions 18, 19, and 20. The decision had been building through budget negotiations since early in the year, but September 2 is the date in the record, the date the missions were formally struck from the schedule. 3 missions. Crews already named, training already underway, hardware already built, and waiting in the assembly facilities. The Saturn V rocket designed for the Apollo 19 mission had been assembled at the Michoud Assembly Facility in Louisiana. The first and second stages were complete. The instrument unit was fabricated and installed. It was a functioning rocket. After the cancellation, it did not fly. Saturn V hardware from the canceled missions now sits in NASA visitor facilities, horizontal on its side, on display. It was built to leave the planet. It never did. Apollo 17 flew anyway, in December 1972. Because the cancellation had been announced after it was already in preparation, and after its crew, Eugene Cernan, Harrison Schmitt, and Ronald Evans, were deep into training. The mission went, the crew landed in the Taurus Littrow Valley on December 11. They spent 75 hours on the surface. They collected more samples than any previous mission. They conducted orbital photographic surveys during Evans's solo passes above them. Then they came home. Cernan was the last to climb the ladder into the ascent stage. He paused at the bottom and made a brief prepared statement. He said the crew would return. That humanity would return. It was December 14th, 1972. He climbed the ladder. No human being has returned to the moon since. No human being born after December 14th, 1972 has stood on the lunar surface. No nation, not the United States, not Russia, not China, not any of the 11 countries currently capable of crewed spaceflight, has attempted a crewed lunar landing in over 50 years. Artemis missions are planned. They have been planned for years. The footprint is still the last one. The official explanation for ending Apollo is coherent. The program had achieved its primary political objective with Apollo 11. The Soviet Union had conceded the race, public interest had peaked and was declining. Budget pressures were real, funds were needed elsewhere. The incremental scientific return of additional landings had diminished against those costs. All of that is documented in the congressional testimony and budget records of the period. What it does not account for is what happened during those final missions, what the orbital cameras documented, what the seismometers recorded, and what the last person to walk on the moon said publicly once in a Los Angeles newspaper and never said again. Every Apollo mission from 12 through 17 conducted systematic orbital photography. The program equipped command modules with mapping cameras and panoramic cameras, precision photographic systems designed for documentary coverage of the lunar surface at resolution levels not surpassed in some cases until the modern era of orbital surveying. During Apollo 17, the command module pilot Ronald Evans conducted 14 solo orbital revolutions while Cernan and Schmitt were below him on the surface. Evans's orbital passes covered a broad equatorial and near-equatorial survey arc. The photography taken during those passes is cataloged in the AS-17 photographic series. Thousands of frames, systematically numbered, covering highland regions, mare basalt plains, crater fields, and portions of the near-equatorial zone. The archive is available through NASA's image database. It has been publicly accessible since the early 1970s. The same photographic program was active during the earlier Apollo missions that flew the orbital surveys preceding the designated landing sites for the canceled missions. Apollo 15 conducted orbital coverage of the Marius Hills region, a volcanic dome field on the northern Oceanus Procellarum, characterized by dozens of dome formations interpreted as shield volcanoes and pyroclastic features. The Marius Hills were the planned landing site for Apollo 18. The orbital surveys that preceded that landing were conducted. The landing was canceled. In 2009, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency's Selene spacecraft, conducting a high-resolution gravity and surface survey of the lunar terrain, identified a large pit in the Marius Hills. The pit was approximately 65 meters wide and 80 meters deep. The entry morphology, a vertical walled shaft, was consistent with the collapse of a lava tube ceiling. Lava tubes are subsurface conduits, created when the exterior crust of a lava flow cools and hardens while the interior continues to drain. When the tube empties, it leaves a hollow channel beneath the surface. The Marius Hills pit is interpreted as an entrance to a lava tube system. That system extends by subsequent radar analysis for kilometers beneath the surface. Apollo 18 was supposed to land in that region before the Selene discovery. Before anyone had confirmed instrumentally that there was a significant hollow subsurface structure beneath the surface of the Marius Hills. Apollo 18 was canceled in 1970. Selene flew in 2007. The data showing a subsurface void at the planned landing site came back in 2009. The mission that would have landed near the lava tube entrance, with seismometers capable of detecting the hollow structure below, was already a museum piece by then. That sequence is in the public record. The Apollo 18 mission documents are in the NASA archive. The JAXA Selene findings are in the published scientific literature. The lava tube discovery at Marius Hills has been followed up by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which has mapped additional pits across the lunar surface. The subsurface void structure of the Moon is, at this point, a documented and active area of research. The question the public record does not answer is whether anything in the pre-cancellation orbital survey data from the Marius Hills region contributed in any documented way to the decision to stop. That connection has not been established in any public document, but neither has it been ruled out. The orbital surveys were conducted. The data was reviewed by mission planners before the cancellation. What that review found has not been published in the documentary record of the Apollo program. That is not an accusation. That is a gap in the public record. But the gap is there. The AS-17 photographic archive contains something beyond the Marius Hills sequence, and it has been in the public record for 50 years without formal institutional engagement. I want to be precise about what I mean by that, because the claim is specific and the framing matters enormously. Independent photographic analysts, working from the same publicly accessible archive that NASA published, have identified specific frames from the Apollo orbital photography series containing formations that do not fit standard geological models. Formations displaying geometric regularity, elevation profiles, and structural dimensions that no published model of natural lunar geology accounts for. Those analyses have been published. They have been presented formally in public settings, and they have received no technical response from any institution in a position to provide one. The analyst who conducted the most systematic published examination of these photographs was Richard Hoagland. Hoagland worked as a science advisor during portions of the Apollo era. His institutional access and credentials from that period are documented, and subsequently spent a significant portion of his career examining the Apollo photographic archive. His analysis of lunar orbital photographs identified specific features in the AS-17 series and in photographs from the earlier lunar orbiter program that he argued displayed geometric regularity inconsistent with natural formation. Processes, precise angular relationships between formations, consistent structural proportions, spatial distribution patterns that appeared systematic rather than random. In 1992, Hoagland presented this analysis in a formal setting at the United Nations, citing specific frame designations from NASA's own publicly accessible archive. NASA's formal response to this specific photographic analysis: there is no record of one, no technical paper addressing the specific frames cited, no counter-analysis by NASA lunar scientists, no acknowledgement in any public document. The archive that the analysis drew from remains public. The frames cited are still in it. The 50-year silence around them is documented by its absence. I want to engage the counter-argument directly, because it is a real one. The counter-argument is pareidolia, the human tendency to identify patterns and shapes in random visual data. The human visual system is tuned to detect structure and regularity. Photographic analysis of complex high-contrast imagery is particularly susceptible to this effect. A qualified explanation for the formations Hoagland documented would begin here, with a demonstration that the apparent geometric regularity is within the expected variation for natural geological features. and that the same pattern detection system that finds the formations meaningful would find equally compelling patterns in random terrain data. That explanation has not been published. The qualified geological assessment of the specific frames, the counter-analysis that would demonstrate the formations are within the natural range, does not exist in the public record. This is the silence, not a dramatic silencing and institutional indifference so complete that it functions the same way. The most significant specific formation in the orbital photographic record is a feature that researchers have called the shard, visible in a photograph from the third lunar orbiter mission, captured in 1967 before the Apollo landings began. The image shows what appears to be a large elevated formation rising above the surface at an angle inconsistent with the surrounding terrain. NASA's position is that it is a processing artifact, a feature produced by the development and scanning of photographic film, rather than by any surface object. That is possible. It is the official position. What it does not account for is the geometric consistency of the feature across multiple frames of the same photographic pass, which is not characteristic of a processing artifact introduced during film development. The lunar orbiter photographs are now in a digitized public archive, following a multi-year restoration project at NASA's Ames Research Center completed in 2014. The shard frames are in that archive. The analysis that would definitively establish whether the feature is a processing artifact or a surface formation, using the digital archive data, with published methodology, has not been conducted. That analysis would require a competent image processing team, access to the publicly available archive, and several months of work. The archive is public, the team would not be difficult to assemble, the definitive analysis does not exist. Eugene Cernan died on January 16, 2017. He was 82 years old, he was a naval aviator, a test pilot, and an aeronautical engineer with a master's degree from the Naval Postgraduate School. He flew in space 3 times. He walked on the moon twice, during Apollo 10, which orbited but did not land, and during Apollo 17, where he was the commander and the last person on the surface. He was not a person given to careless statements. In 1973, the year after he returned from the moon for the last time, Cernan gave an interview to the Los Angeles Times. He was asked about unidentified aerial phenomena. He answered, "I want to read that answer as it appears in the documented record, because the precise words matter more than any paraphrase." Cernan said, "I've been asked about UFOs, and I've said publicly I thought they were somebody else, some other civilization." Those are his words, attributed to him directly, in a major American newspaper 1 year after he became the last human to stand on the lunar surface. Consider what is contained in that statement. Cernan does not say he has been uncertain about the existence of other civilizations. He does not say he suspects the possibility or that the evidence is suggestive. He says he thought they were somebody else, some other civilization. He uses the past tense, which implies prior consideration. He uses the definitive construction, not a possible civilization or something we don't understand. He is attributing the phenomenon to a specific category of actor. He is reporting a conclusion he has already reached. Cernan does not say what he observed. He does not say when he reached this conclusion. He does not say whether the observation that led to it occurred during a spaceflight, during training, or through information received through other channels. He makes the statement. The interview continues. He moves to other subjects. In the decades that followed, the Los Angeles Times statement became one of the most cited documents in the research literature on astronaut testimony. Cernan was asked about it in subsequent interviews. His response was consistent. He acknowledged making it, he stood by the general sentiment, and he did not elaborate on the specific experience or information that led to the conclusion, not once. In 44 years of public life, hundreds of interviews, a memoir, documentary appearances, NASA anniversary events, the elaboration did not come. Consider what elaboration would have required. A single interview, a single question, what specifically did you observe, and when? Cernan was accessible. He was a prominent public figure who gave regular interviews throughout his post-Apollo career. The question was available to any journalist who pursued it with follow-up. The answer, if Cernan had chosen to give it, would have been one of the most significant statements in the documented history of the space program. The answer was not given. NASA has not, in any public document, formally addressed Cernan's Los Angeles Times statement. There is no NASA press release, no agency statement, no response from a NASA spokesperson at any point in the 51 years since the statement was made. An institution that employs communications professionals and responds routinely to public inquiries about its missions has generated no formal response to a specific public statement by the last human to walk on the moon. The statement is in the Los Angeles Times archive. The elaboration on that statement from the man who made it does not exist in any public record. Cernan died in 2017. Whatever he knew that led him to that conclusion died with him. And the record of the Apollo program contains his conclusion without the evidence that supported it. In 1970, the same year NASA was striking Apollo 18, 19, and 20 from the schedule, two Soviet scientists published a paper in Sputnik magazine. Their names were Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Sherbakov. They were researchers with institutional affiliations within the Soviet Academy of Sciences. Sputnik was not a fringe publication. It was a state-sanctioned Soviet journal of popular science, peer-reviewed with institutional credibility within the Soviet system. Their paper was titled, "Is the Moon the Creation of Alien Intelligence?" The title sounds extraordinary. The argument inside the paper does not begin extraordinarily. It begins with data, specifically with the seismic data that NASA's Apollo program had published. Apollo 12, in November 1969, had deliberately crashed its lunar module ascent stage into the surface as an instrumented seismic test. The seismometers the crew had placed on the surface measured the result. NASA's own technical report on the experiment states the outcome plainly. The moon reverberated for approximately 55 minutes. The report uses a specific word to describe the phenomenon. The word is rang. The moon rang like a bell. A solid rocky body of the moon's density and composition does not ring for 55 minutes. Standard geophysical models of seismic wave propagation through rocky bodies predict rapid attenuation, a brief signal lasting perhaps a minute or two, diminishing as the wave energy disperses. The Apollo 13 mission, when the Saturn IVB rocket stage was crashed into the surface, produced a reverberation lasting 3 hours and 20 minutes. That figure is in NASA's published report on the event. Vasin and Sherbakov's argument was structural. The observed seismic behavior, extended resonance at specific frequencies, the characteristic ring rather than the expected dampening, is more consistent with a hollow metallic shell than with a solid body. They were not claiming divine origin or alien construction as certainty. They were arguing that the published NASA data is better explained by a hollow shell model than by a solid body model. The argument was peer-reviewed and published in a Soviet state journal. That paper has not been formally refuted in the Western scientific literature in the 54 years since its publication. NASA did not publish a technical response. The specific argument that the seismic reverberation patterns are better modeled by a hollow structure than a solid body has not been addressed in any published paper in the standard planetary science literature. Now consider the geopolitical position of Vasin and Sherbakov's home institution. The Soviet Union in 1970 was in active ideological competition with the United States on every front, including the scientific and technological. If NASA's data contained evidence that contradicted NASA's own published models, something that implied the moon was not what the official narrative described, the Soviet state had every incentive to amplify that evidence, to use it as propaganda in the ongoing space race narrative. State-sanctioned Soviet publications were tools of that competition. Sputnik magazine was not independent of Soviet state interests. Vasin and Sherbakov published the anomaly. They did not suppress it. They put it in a peer-reviewed state journal with full institutional credibility, and nothing happened. NASA did not respond. The Western scientific establishment did not engage it. The paper sits in the literature cited occasionally, formally refuted by no one. The Soviet crewed lunar program, which had been advancing through the 1960s toward a landing which had successfully flown Zond spacecraft around the moon and recovered them, which had Alexei Leonov designated as the commander of the Soviet landing mission, was quietly and permanently canceled after Apollo 11. The official explanation was the death of chief designer Sergei Korolev in 1966. Budget pressures and the demoralization that followed the string of Soviet lunar setbacks, all of that contributed. None of it fully explains the permanence of the cancellation. Leonov was still alive. He had trained, he was the first human to walk in space. The organizational disruption caused by Korolev's death had partially resolved. The Soviet program continued in other forms. In 1999, Leonov gave an interview in which he addressed briefly the Soviet program's cancellation. He said the cancellation was related to what they knew by then about the moon's nature. He did not elaborate. He died in 2019. The elaboration did not come. Cernan, I thought they were somebody else, some other civilization. No elaboration. Dead 2017. Leonov, what they knew about the moon's nature. No elaboration. Dead 2019. Two men, two programs that competed for a decade. Two sides of the most documented geopolitical rivalry in the history of spaceflight. Both programs ended. Both men made one specific documented statement that implied a conclusion about the moon that was significantly more extraordinary than anything the official record contains. Neither man elaborated. Both men are gone. The Soviet Union had every incentive to expose NASA anomalies. Their scientists independently reached the same structural anomaly from the same published data. Their program also ended. The alignment of outcomes between two adversarial programs operating independently, investigating the same object, is itself a data point. The space race provides a partial explanation. It does not explain why Leonov made that statement, and why in the entire remaining span of his life, it was never followed. I want to state the official explanation for the Apollo program's end as fairly as I can, because it is mostly right, and because the gap I am pointing to is not in the explanation itself, but in what the explanation cannot reach. The budget explanation is real. At its peak, the Apollo program consumed between 3 and 4% of the United States federal budget. Each mission cost hundreds of millions of dollars. The political objective had been achieved. The Nixon administration's priorities were elsewhere. Congressional appetite for the Apollo budget was declining. The program ended for reasons that are institutional, budgetary, and political. That is documented and coherent. What it does not account for is the specific timing. The cancellations were announced in September 1970, before the results of the final 3 missions were in. Before Apollo 15's orbital survey of the Marius Hills was conducted, before the Shorty Crater geological discoveries of Apollo 17, before the systematic orbital photography of the regions the canceled missions were supposed to investigate on the ground. The decision to stop was made before the data was in. Budget-driven program terminations are generally calibrated to the results they are cutting off from. This one was front-loaded. The second thing the explanation does not account for is the 52 years since. Budget pressures are a 1972 argument. They are not a 2024 argument in the same form. The United States has spent hundreds of billions of dollars on human spaceflight since 1972. The International Space Station has been continuously crewed since 2000. China has landed on the far side of the moon. 11 nations are capable of crewed spaceflight. The cost of a crewed lunar mission in the current era of commercial spaceflight and reusable launch vehicles is a fraction of what it was in the Apollo era. The specific investigation that would address the photographic anomalies in the AS-17 archive, a crewed surface mission to the highland regions documented in those frames, is technically feasible. It is not being planned with any urgency. The formations are still in the archive, the analysis is still in the public record, the follow-up investigation is still absent, and the definitive counter-analysis, a formal geological paper addressing the specific frames cited by independent researchers, demonstrating with published methodology that the formations are within the natural range, would require less effort than dozens of papers published annually in planetary science journals. That paper does not exist. In 50 years, it has not been written. I want to be precise about where I am landing. I am not telling you the moon is an artificial structure. I am not telling you NASA made contact with extraterrestrial life during the Apollo program. And I am not telling you the moon landings were fabricated. That is a separate argument, one I am not making, and one that I think is undermined by the independent Soviet photographic record, the independently documented seismic data, the independently verified sample analyses from research teams worldwide. The landings happened, what was found during them, and what was decided because of them is the question I have been asking. What I am telling you is that the orbital photographic record from Apollo 17 and the earlier lunar orbiter program contains formations that independent analysts have formally documented as inconsistent with standard geological models. Those analyses are in the public record, formally presented in a public setting, citing specific frames from NASA's own archive. The technical refutation of those analyses, the published response, does not exist. Silence is not refutation, but in 50 years, it is also not explanation. What I am also telling you is that Eugene Cernan, the last human to walk on the moon, told the Los Angeles Times in 1973 that he believed unidentified phenomena represented another civilization. He made that statement. He did not elaborate. He died in 2017. Whatever he observed, and when, and in what context, the elaboration has not come. That statement is in the newspaper archive. The explanation for it from the man who made it does not exist in the public record. The Apollo 18 mission was canceled in September 1970. It was planned to land in the Marius Hills. In 2009, Japan's Selene spacecraft confirmed the existence of a large subsurface hollow structure in that region, a lava tube entrance, potentially kilometers long, directly beneath the planned landing zone. The mission that would have deployed seismometers capable of detecting that structure was canceled 39 years before the structure was confirmed from orbit. That sequence is documented. Whether it is coincidence or something else is not a question the official record answers. The AS-17 photographic archive is available through NASA's image database. The formations documented by independent analysts are in it. They have been there since 1973. The analysis of what those formations contain is in the published record. The technical response to that analysis, the paper that would settle the question, has not been written. The missions that would have investigated the relevant regions on the ground were canceled before they flew. And the last person to stand on the surface told a newspaper the year after he came home that he believed what he had seen represented another civilization, and then spent 44 years not saying what he meant. Cernan's last words on the moon were that the crew would return. He said it at the bottom of the ladder on December 14, 1972. Then he climbed. The footprint he left is preserved in airless vacuum, unchanged. The photographic archive from the orbital survey conducted above it is public and unaddressed. The statement he made in 1973 is in the archive of a major American newspaper, surrounded by 52 years of silence. I find that difficult to explain.